Dear game developers, games industry friends, dreamers and lovers, welcome to King's Landing. Welcome to scenic Dubrovnik to the 4th edition of Reboot Develop conference. I'm excited to be able to welcome you in such a big number and even more than happy that with your help we have managed to gather some of the biggest and most relevant names in the games industry to speak at this beautiful venue in the city of Kings. I especially want to thank our sponsors, without whom, honestly, this whole special thing would never have been possible, especially not with our laughable ticket prices. This year, a very special thanks goes to our dear, dear friends from Fingersoft for supporting us all the way. Tony, are you here? Tony's probably sleeping from the parties at his boat. Well, thanks, Tony. With this many amazing Finnish speakers and developers attending, you really helped us make Reboot Develop the best Finnish game developer conference in the world. We have a tradition of opening the conference with truly legendary international industry names. In the last 3 years, people like Patrice Desilets and Tim Schafer have been taking rounds on the stage and having the honor to open one of the most rapidly expanding industry conferences. But we do have our local games industry legends of our own. And it's finally time that one of them does his duty in keynoting this truly groundbreaking edition of Reboot Develop. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage a dear friend, true games industry veteran that has been part of it all for almost 3 decades now. Welcome the CDO and co-founder of Croteam, Mr. Alen Ladavac.
Hello, hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Damir, for inviting me here. I have to say I'm very excited to be here, and it's always great to talk in front of a large audience of game developers and other people from the games industry. I like game developers and game industry because I think we're quite special and very, very passionate about what we do, and especially because Reboot Develop as well, I feel it's a kind of like a special kind of conference. It's very dear to my heart because all the game conferences, they all have those talks when we talk a lot about game design, about art, about technology and all those things, and so does Reboot. But over those years, we've come to get used to the fact that at Reboot Develop, we are much more engage with each other and hanging around, talking to other developers. So I consider this more like a people's conference than other conferences are. And in this kind of mood, I would like to dedicate this talk of mine to game developers and to everyone else in the games industry. And I'd like to make it a little bit more non-technical, lighthearted, and especially because we are in this nice sunny venue, and I would like to start this great conference with something a little bit easier. Normally, in this kind of talks, I'm kind of like expected to talk about how it was when we just started developing games and all that, and I'm sure I'm going to be mentioning that along the way, but I'd like to start with right now, with where we are going, what we are doing, and why we are doing that. So if I'm going to talk about right now in game development, I definitely cannot skip talking about VR. Now, I promise this is not going to be a talk about VR, because I'm sure we all had a lot of it. But I have to touch it at the beginning, because I think it's very important for our industry in general. First, I'd like to ask you, how many of you have developed and shipped or are right now working on some VR title? Well, yeah, it's a pretty small number. And how many of you have tried like a real VR experience? How many of you have tried Vive or Rift with hand controllers? It's a pretty big number, but still a lot of people I see have never tried that. And this is one of the problems that we have right now with this great new technology. I'm going to talk a little bit about it later. Croteam, we've worked on several VR titles over the past 1 year, and I think we got quite a bit of experience in there, and we have large faith in this kind of technology, and we think this is something that's moving games forward. And there's still a lot of things to be discovered in there, but it's also not very easy. And while we do know how to do some stuff, and we hope that in the future, in Series M4 and the Talos Principle 2, we hope that we will be able to ship VR on day one together with the flat versions. But we'll see about that. But even though we know all that, we know that there's still much more to be discovered in the future. Now, first, I'd like to remind you about one other very important and very groundbreaking technology that appeared more than 100 years ago, and that is the movies. So if we are talking about movies, I'm sure everyone's heard about this movie. It's one of the first movies. It's actually just one shot of a train arriving at the station, but at that time, it was quite revolutionary. And they say that reactions of the audience were something like this. Now, even though this, why is it doing it to me? Yeah. Okay, so I would like to compare that to the average response to some to some VR experiences, right? So even though this audience in the first movie theater were quite surprised with what they saw, I think it doesn't quite compare to how people react to various VR experiences. Like, for example, this guy is very well known. That's Ronnie O'Sullivan, a very well known player of this game, but he got so immersed into it that he thought he could lean on the table, and he's not the only one. I mean, it happened to all of us who tried VR. So what I would like to say is that this is something that human race has never experienced before. The ability for a computer-generated image to evoke such a response that you think you're somewhere else. I would like to compare this to something like this. Now, we all know holodeck. That's something that all the sci-fi fans and both the game developers and other geeks have dreamed of for more than a few decades. And now, after we dreamed about all that, we got served something like this. So this kind of technology is now finally possible for the last year and something. And you can see, and whoever has played it probably knows how it feels, that people are really getting very immersed into it. Now, the question is, does it really look exactly the same as what we would expect from the holodeck? I would like to say yes, because look at what the early authors imagined in the very early sci-fi. This is from Jules Verne's Landing on the Moon. That's how Jules Verne and his contemporary artists imagined that landing on the moon would look like. Even if you go much later, if you look at how, for example, this screenshot is from a movie, it's called Mouse on the Moon, and this movie has been filmed just a few years before the actual Apollo 11 landing, which looked like this. So the artist always imagines something based on the concept that they're looking forward. They're looking forward to someone getting on the moon, and Neil Armstrong did get to the moon, although it didn't really look quite exactly the same as they imagined it, but he did get there. In same way, the VR, it's not really exactly, it doesn't look exactly the same as a holodeck, but we got the same effect. We got the people who think that they're somewhere else. And this is something that's changing games. Now, as you probably know, especially, I think you better know it if you haven't seen VR, that you can't really demonstrate this to anyone, because a lot of people who haven't seen VR think that VR is a fad and that it doesn't really work that way. When you see all those people being so happy and excited about it, it seems like, why do they feel that way? But you have to experience it by yourself. No amount of showing movies, me talking to you, or even the mixed reality movies, where as you've seen in this one, when we put people inside the virtual reality, it doesn't really show you what it's like. And that's one of the biggest problems right now, because we cannot expand it, because people can't know how good it is until they see it for their own eyes. But the question is, why am I talking about VR so much? I think VR is important in game development because it's a very natural extension of what we've been doing so far. So, question is why we are game developers, why we are doing what we do. People say a lot of things about the game developers. Some people think that game developers are here to play games all day, and there's been some theories that you can play several games at the same time or something. I would say that as a game developer, as compared to what I would do as a game player, I think I would play much more games than I do as a game developer, because game development is very time intensive, and you spend a lot of time working on a game, and what you play your own game 1,000 times again. I don't think it really qualifies as being a player who plays a lot of games. Now, some other people say that we are in there for the money, and I tried to Google a game developer with a private jet, and I found that even Notch, he doesn't have a private jet. I found the only person was this lady, Kim Kardashian. She does have a private jet, and she appears under game developer because there's games made in her name. So she's kind of like a game designer. But I don't think that business and games is actually paying for the jet of hers. Now, it's not that either. So there's another theory that we are in this for fame. And over here, you see a large crowd of League of Legends players, and they've gathered together not to watch League of Legends developers develop the game. They've gathered to watch other players play the game. So in the end, game players are actually more famous than game developers. I mean, we're famous, like we know each other around in these circles, but game players don't care that much about who game developers are in most cases. So guess it's not fame, it's not money, it's not playing games all day. So why do we do it? Are we even useless in the end? And there's this nice anecdote that it always happens around in this area in Croatia and the countries around it. There's this term when you don't say computer games, you say like little games. They use a diminutive word for games, and a lot of our guys around here get quite disturbed when that happens, because it's kind of like, games. There's just game for kids. That's not something that's very important. And based on that, you usually, even when we started making games, even when they really started making money and we made a company out of it and work for a long time, ship several titles, we still got questions like, you go around, visit some relatives, or talk to your neighbors, and they ask you, what are you doing? Say, I make games. No, I mean, what you really do? Yeah, I make games. No, but I mean, what you do for a living, what's your day job? And they just can't get it that you are actually, game development is your day job, because they still have a lot of public, aside from the game players themselves, have this feeling that game development is something very simple or something very, not very useful for the world in general. But I'd like to show some evidence that that's not so. Now, I think everyone here has heard of SpaceX and Elon Musk. So SpaceX is probably the most leading-edge technology company in the world. And why do we have this? This is the SpaceX booth at the GDC. And that happens very often. I think at most GDCs there's a SpaceX booth. The question is, why is SpaceX having a booth at the GDC? So this is what Elon Musk himself says. We actually hire a lot of our best software engineering out of the gaming industry. In gaming, there's a lot of smart engineering talent doing really complex things. Compared to a lot of the algorithms involved with massive multiplayer online games, a docking sequence between spacecraft is actually relatively straightforward. So another person who mentioned things like this, and this anecdote is not very fresh. It goes back for more than 15 years. That's Mr. Michael Abrash. I'm supposed most of the people, especially who work in technology, have heard about Michael Abrash. He's originally been involved with the graphics stack on Windows NT, so most of that is his baby in there. And afterwards, he worked on Quake 1. And after Quake 1, he thought that maybe he should go for something better. And he disappeared from the industry for a few years. No one knew where he was. And he actually went to Microsoft to work on natural language processing. Now remember, that was 15 years ago. 15 years ago, natural language processing, what we right now know as speech recognition that we have in our phones and everything, it was sci-fi tech back then. So he worked on that, and after 2 years, he returned back to the industry, and he gave a very interesting talk at a conference, and that talk went something like this. All around the talk, he talked about other things, but this is the gist of it. So basically, I had a notion that somewhere else there were software projects with truly deep technical challenges, with geniuses pushing the technology envelope in a far more meaningful way than in games. During those 2 years, what I really learned was that I was chasing illusions and that we are having it pretty amazingly good in the games industry. So it's a very smart guy, and that was 15 years ago. Since that time, the things just got more complex and more interesting, and they've been getting that way every day. Now, another example is if I want to compare it to NASA, for example. So there's a lot of things that NASA do that later, as we like to call it, trickle down into the rest of the world. So for example, scratch-resistant lenses, that's something that's been originally designed and developed for spacesuit helmets, and we use it in most of our glasses, whoever wears glasses. Nowadays, there's filtration systems that that are used in disaster recovery situations and other places where you have to filter water for drinking. That's been developed for space stations. Artificial hearts are using pumps that's originally been designed to pump fuel and other liquids in space travel. There's a lot of examples like that. Now, it's not just NASA that's doing things like that. So what I would like to say is that game development, even though it doesn't seem that way on the outset, we are also contributing a large amounts of trickle-down technology to the everyday's life. So if it wasn't for the games, the GPUs wouldn't be nearly where they are right now, and the GPUs are not used just to play games. They've been started being used into various other purposes for AI, used for search engines, for image recognitions in self-driving cars. There's a lot of uses that are based on the GPU technology, and all of that technology would not be there if the gamers were not buying the new hardware, and if we weren't made games who actually pushed that hardware so far that NVIDIA, AMD, and others had to actually make better hardware. Another interesting example, this is a Power VR graphics card from early 2000 or late 90s, I think. And Power VR right now is used, that very advanced version of this chip is used in all of the iPhones today. So all of you who have an iPhone in your pocket, the technology that allows that iPhone to run such beautiful graphics with spending so little battery is based on this technology that was developed in the 90s in order to lower the costs to make high-power games available to more gamers. So based on that technology, we now are able to make the cell phones or in smartphones as they are right now. So that's how I think that the games are pushing the software and the hardware forward for entire world. But it's not only the programmers and the hardware vendors that are helping here. So we got a lot of things in the art section of games that are improving the general art situation in the world itself, I think. So I don't think I have to talk a lot about how the budgets and revenues go between the games and the movies. A lot of know of the examples like how the Grand Theft Auto earned double what the Star Wars Force Awakens did, even though that was the best-selling movie of all times at that time. But even though it is that way, people still, I mean, a lot of people outside of the gaming industry still think that movies are much more advanced than the games. Whereas we all know that it's not like that. Movies still do look better because there are recordings that we have to do all the rendering and everything, so it's not that simple. But it's very, very interesting that we can, the fact that we still have a lot of grounds to cover, it gives us more to work upon and improve in the future, which is good. So if you look at the stories in games right now are already much more complex than stories in movies. If you take like Mass Effect Andromeda has all the funny animations aside and everything. It has 65,000 lines of dialogue, whereas Star Wars The Force Awakens doesn't have 65,000 letters in the dialogue. So thank you. So we have to work on a lot more content, and we still have to develop our skills and our technologies and approaches in the way we do it, so that we could be able, once in the future, to create such detailed experience as it is in the movies with such complex content, which is a different thing. And it applies to all of the parts of the art, like if you just take a look at what we are doing with our worlds. Nice interesting example is how this Star Wars scene was filmed. So they put down some mats in case Luke Skywalker falls down. If you have a game, you also have to take care of not just what happens if he falls down. You know there's going to be players who are going to deliberately jump down just to see what happens. And the question is how you cover all these kind of situations. So as we are going forward from just cutting those parts out or forbidding the player to do that, as we go forward towards allowing the player to jump down, and then what happens? Do we put a stair so he can come back up and everything? With all those things, we are making games more complex, more interesting to the players, and we are advancing the entire art itself. The question is, what is art? There's so many definitions, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but basically, we are working towards creating something that has emotional power, that gives some new experience to the player, and that's the most important thing. We are trying to do something to make player feel something that they have never felt before, which is why I mentioned VR at the beginning, because it brings the whole thing to a new level. But even before VR existed, we were always creating virtual worlds, even though they were not virtual realities in a visual sense, but they are creating worlds that the players can immerse into if we apply what you call the suspension of disbelief enough. And if you create it correctly, the player is going to immerse into the world, and in his mind, he's going to be in a virtual world and attached to it. For those things, I'm sure that every one of you who worked on some games probably had feedback that astounded you about what the players think and how they feel about the game. I can only give a few examples from our games, like, for example, on Serious Sam. There's this guy who emailed us way back that he said, "Thank you guys for making this game, because of the game, my kids are no longer afraid of the dark." And we said, like, what does this have to do with anything? How's that possible? He said, "My kids say that now if the monsters come from the dark, Serious Sam's going to come and shoot the monsters, so they're not afraid anymore." So there's another guy who said that he doesn't like to actually play the game. He just walks into the desert, because we put just some large expanses of the desert, and he walks there, and he just looks at the dunes, and that reminds him of the time when he was back in Africa under Rommel in World War II. So you get to many very different players and many very different opinions and many very different responses that you get from them. Like, In the Talos principle, I like some of the responses, how, for example, people got attached to this Milton character that you can converse with, and they want to prove that he is wrong. But the actual script is written that way that no matter how you put a dialogue through, he always has something to say in the other direction, and you can never prove him wrong, but they get attached to him as if he's a real character, you're a real person. On the other hand, you have this Elohim character who's like a false god. He tells you what not to do and what to do. And some people, even though some players just like to do what they're not supposed to, but for a lot of players, they get so immersed that they come to the forum and say, I would like to see what's in there, but Elohim told me not to go there. Now I'm afraid. I don't want to go there. So they're really immersed in those worlds, and through this, we can give new experiences to them. And this is something that everyone needs, and that's why the humanity itself has developed art, and this is where we are going towards. And I think with VR games, we are just one-upping all that. And I would like to say that some people are afraid that maybe VR games are going to push everything else out of the industry, but it doesn't happen. It didn't happen with the MMOGs 15 years ago. It didn't happen with mobile. It didn't happen with free-to-play. So I think all of those things are just going to live together. Now, at this time, it's great to be here at this moment with all those different technologies and all the different choices of genres that you can do from 8-bit through mobile to 3D all the way to VR, and you can choose how you want to express yourself and how you want to be creative and give some new experiences to the player. On the other hand, it's not all roses, and game development has always been and still is a very difficult job to have. So I remember when we were back at the university, when we started working on Serious Sam, most of us were still studying, and we had to go to the university, and then after the university, we used to work in the afternoon or on the weekends, and people would come to us say, hey man, there's a party tonight, do you want to go? No, I have some collision code to work on or some game design. And they said, oh man, you work too hard. That's not good for you. Well, I don't know. Maybe it wasn't good for me. Look what that brought me. Now, I know it's going to be a little bit controversial, but I'd like to cover this topic. So, the thing is, people say usually you work 9 to 5, and after the work, you get to do the things that you like. But what if the things that I like is making games? How does that work? And that's how it happens with a lot of us. And what happens, on the other hand, is that while game development brings people from different areas, from software development, like business software development, and from art, like from movies and digital advertising, you put all those things together, you get their managers, their publishers, their producers, and some of them especially like to abuse this situation where people like their work, so they push them into impossible deadlines and very long crunches. So that's how we got those infamous EA spouse and Rockstar wives and all those things. And it's definitely bad to be in that kind of place. But on the other hand, you also see something that I like to call dangerous counterposition. And here I like to step back a little bit. So, so this is a counterposition. All dogs are mammals, hence something that is not a mammal definitely cannot be a dog. It's common sense to everyone. This is how people reason. It's also formalized as a counterposition by propositional logic. Now, this is a picture that goes with that. So, imagine that I'm perhaps not a dog person. I'm totally not a dog person, and I don't want a dog, but I have to get myself a pet. So, one of the way that I could reason about this, yeah, this doesn't work on this screen, that's normal. One way I could reason is, I don't want a dog, and dog's a mammal, so I don't want to get any mammals. Maybe I should get a spider. No, that's a completely wrong way to reason about it, isn't it, right? Because look at the cute kitty, or the rabbit. I like rabbits. So, in the same way, people reason that way about what happens with work in game industry. So, it's actually the same picture. See, dog, horrible year-long crunch. Because horrible year-long crunch is some weird kind of ways to schedule your work, so we must be working 9 to 5. And this concept I put under cats and rabbits here, Stephen King, George Martin, and J.K. Rowling. And people told me when I showed them this slide that I couldn't possibly put those people into this box together. And that's exactly why I put them there, because there are different examples. I get this anecdote where Stephen King was talking with George Martin, and George Martin was, he was very curious. He said, Stephen, what did this say exactly? How the heck do you write so fast? I have a good 6 months and crank out 3 chapters. Meanwhile, you wrote 3 books in that time. So Stephen said that it's very simple. He gives himself a limit that he must write 6 pages each day, which usually takes him about 3 to 4 hours, but he does it every day, 7 days a week. No holidays, no nothing. And by that rhythm, he can write 1 book in 2 months. Very simple. George Martin, on the other hand, you know how George Martin works. I mean, he usually doesn't. Just write something when it comes to him. Well, if it works for him, it works for him. It's great, right? J.K. Rowling, she said that she has kids and she has to take care of them sometimes. So she sometimes doesn't work for days. But sometimes she just goes on and works for 10 hours a day, every day. It's all about what fits you at this particular moment. So, in this situation, I don't want to be condescending, and the main point I want to say is that you should work to your heart, not to some hard set rules. If you have an inspiration, you do it the way that you want to do it. Now, if you got some other profession, some menial job or something, you can probably say, yeah, I just work here, I just do what needs to be done. But if you're any kind of artist, and game developers go into that category, there's no way you can, if you have to love your work, you can't just don't care about it and just work there. So, definitely different. Funny part is, I wrote this part of the speech at 1 a.m. because I was trying 9 to 5 to work on the speech for several days and just never came. And then one day at 5 p.m. I just started getting my inspiration, so I ended it at 2 a.m. It's just how it works. But with all this is, if you have things that are hard in your life, I like this quote. I have to attribute it to Mark Manson, this is something that's very intuitive to a lot of people, but he managed to just formalize it in such a simple way lately. He said, choose your struggles. So what he's trying to say there is that when you ask people, what do you want in your life? They say, I want a lot of money, I want a great career, I want to have a beautiful wife, a handsome husband, whatever, I want to have nice kids, nice dog, but that's all the things that you want to get, right? The question normally in life is not what you want to get. Everyone wants great things. The question is what you can give. Not what you want to give, but what you can give, what's your capability, and what are the struggles that you will be capable to push through. That's what defines you. So if you're a teacher, you can't just say, I want to be a teacher because I like to give knowledge to the kids. If you want to be a teacher, you're going to have to be able to cope with kids that maybe some of them are slow. You have to take special attention for that. Maybe some of them, they just can't sit in the place and can't learn anything, so you have to take care of that as well. If you're going to be an athlete, you can't just say, I like winning, and I'm going to be an athlete because I could win. But you also have to put up with long workouts. You have to put up with some injuries and a lot of failures that's bound to come and everything. If you're a game developer, you'll know how it goes. You have to play the same game ridden with placeholder content, crashing all the time, and you have to play it over and over again and tune it, and in some cases you have to give up on some great content that you created, but it just doesn't work in reality, or maybe it can never be optimized well or something. So those are the things that the game developers do. Those are why we are here. We're not here because of the money or the fame or because we like to play games. We are there because this kind of struggle is something that we are able to cope with in order to create great content that the players are going to love. So if you're able to do all that, and in the end, you can accomplish something great, and I think that we are all here because we are kind of part of this special bunch, people who are able to do things like that. In the end, I would like to wish you good luck in your creations and to be very innovative and create great stuff. But before that, I wish you to attend a lot of great sessions, hang around with a lot of great people that are here, and last but not least, have some great parties. Thank you, everyone.